My name is Ariana, and for all of my 14 years, my entire world has been this isolated castle on the hill. I have always lived here, hidden away like a secret treasure. My day started in the lesson room, surrounded by old books and the quiet atmosphere of the castle. I was humming a few lines from a poem about how everything we see might just be a dream within a dream. My tutor, who was wearing his usual mask, nodded at me. He explained that, according to the poet, this whole world and all existing life is just an illusion, and that reality doesn't actually exist. He told me that philosophers call this the dream argument. I looked down at my book, thinking about what an interesting lesson that was. Suddenly, I noticed a bright, golden ray of sunshine sneaking through a gap in the curtain. It was so pretty and sparkling. I excitedly pointed it out to my tutor, saying that this kind of weather put me in such a lovely, dreamy mood. However, my tutor didn't share my excitement. He immediately walked over and pulled the curtains shut, blocking out the light. He told me sternly that there is no rose without thorn. He warned me that even though the sunshine looks glorious, it would only harm my eye. After the tutor left the room, I looked at myself in the mirror, feeling a sudden wave of sadness. I knew he was right, or at least that's what I've always been told. The maids constantly remind me that sunlight is the ultimate enemy for my beautiful, sensitive blue eyes. They say that if I look at the sun even once, I will never be able to see anything ever again. That is the reason why I have never been allowed to set foot outside this castle. A servant knocked on the door and entered with my breakfast. Watching her move, I thought about how all my maids look exactly the same because of the masks they wear. I remember when I was a little child, I got curious one day and pulled the mask off one of them. It was a bad idea. As a punishment, I was denied dessert for a whole week. And to be honest, it wasn't even worth it because the maid's face was exceedingly ordinary. I actually think the masks look far better. Anyway, I suppose all that matters is that they take great care of me. Each day without fail, they bring me food and water. They let me pick out new clothes from a selection of beautiful princess dresses. I was sitting there quietly sipping my creamy potato soup. Suddenly, a loud noise shattered the silence. I heard someone screaming desperately, demanding to be let out. My curiosity got the best of me. I quietly went out into the hallway and hid in a corner to peek. I saw two maids struggling to force a screaming girl into a room and lock the door. I frowned, trying to remember if I had ever seen her before, but I was sure I hadn't. I wondered if she was from the outside world. Poor girl, it looked like she couldn't control herself at all. I thought to myself that the world out there must be incredibly scary to have driven her into such madness. Later that day, back in the safety of my own room, I tried to convince myself that I was better off where I was. I sat there thinking that the castle was much safer than whatever wild world was out there. I had everything I needed right here. I could play all day, paint colorful pictures, knit warm scarves, and read endless stories. It was so peaceful, however. Despite the quiet comfort of my room, I just couldn't stop thinking about that poor girl I saw early. I kept wondering what was going to happen to her. Suddenly, a scream pierced the air again, making me jump in surprise. The screaming didn't stop, and eventually, my curiosity was stronger than my fear. I sneaked out of my room and crept towards where the noise was coming from. When I peered into the room, the strange girl was still furiously banging on the door and screaming at the top of her lungs. I tried to hush her, telling her to stop screaming because no one was listening anyway. She stopped banging and rolled her eyes at me in pure anger, demanding to know who I was. I felt a bit awkward, so I scratched my head and hesitated before introducing myself as Mistress. To my surprise, she laughed in my face. She told me that Mistress isn't a name and asked if I was stupid. I felt a bit defensive and explained that it was just a name and that everybody in the castle called me that. This girl was so stubborn. She seemed to be wary of absolutely everything. I thought to myself that she was just a poor little girl from the outside world who didn't understand how things worked here. After I persisted for a while, she finally softened up enough to tell me that her name was Nora. I was just about to ask her why she was here when suddenly two maids appeared out of nowhere. They took me by the arm and pulled me away. They didn't scold me, but they spoke in a very serious, stern tone, insisting that I should not interact with such a wicked girl. They also firmly reminded me that I must not be late for my embroidery class. Sitting in class later, I let out a big yawn. It was boring, but I couldn't focus on the needlework anyway. Despite her brash nature, it was actually nice to finally get to talk to a girl my own age. I found Nora rather interesting. As I stitched, I kept thinking about how I could sneak out and see her again. Suddenly, another ear-piercing scream echoed through the hall. The noise startled me so badly that the needle slipped and I pricked my finger. A sharp pain shot through my hand. That annoying girl's screaming was really becoming a problem. I ran out to check on her, but the maids immediately stepped in front of me, blocking my path. I tried to reason with them. I suggested that perhaps I could talk some sense into her. I assured them that the last time I spoke to her, she was acting totally normal. The maids looked at each other, clearly desperate for the noise to stop, so they agreed to let me go to her. As I predicted, the moment I approached Nora, she stopped screaming. I leaned in close and whispered to her that my real name is Ariana. I explained that screaming never works in this place. I told her to just pretend she was listening to my words and promised that I would help her out. The maids looked quite surprised when Nora immediately calmed herself down. She showed signs of following my directions by nicely stepping back to the table and eating her food. Seeing that the situation was under control, the maids let us be and left the room. We began to chat, and that was the start of our friendship. Ever since then, the maids allowed me to visit Nora every day, talking to her through a window. She shared her story with me. She told me that before her mother died, she gave Nora an address to find her biological father, a man she'd never met before. Nora's grandma had helped her set up a meeting with him and took her to the meeting point. She told me she was so nervous but happy to finally meet her dad. At first, he was just as kind and charming as she had imagined. But then, right after they said goodbye to her grandma, he brought Nora here and let those masked people lock her up. I tried to look on the bright side and told her that she was fortunate to be here because it is safe. Nora immediately denied it. She insisted that it wasn't safe and that safety was just what they wanted me to believe. Then Nora told me all about the outside world. She described things called schools and shopping malls and told me about her friends. Every day, she even drew me paintings of the outside world. She drew beautiful memories with her family, her mom who passed away, and even her dad, despite the fact she had met him only once. I looked at the pictures and felt confused. Family? I wondered what that word really meant. All I had ever known were the faceless maids in their masks. The next day, when I visited Nora as usual, the atmosphere felt different. She leaned close to the window and suddenly told me that we needed to get out of there. I was confused and asked her what she meant, reminding her that this was my home. Nora shook her head and told me firmly that it wasn't a home, it was a prison. She asked me who on earth stays inside for 14 years. I tried to explain the truth to her, telling her it was because of my eyes. I said that I would go blind if I went out there, and that my maids only wanted the best for me, which was why they kept me here. Nora looked at me like I was losing my mind. She asked if I was crazy and told me I had been tricked. She urged me to think about it, asking if I knew who gave birth to me and why that person left me with these people. She asked if I didn't want to find out the truth. Her words stuck in my head. This was my home, wasn't it? But thinking about what Nora just said, as well as the outside world that she rambled about every day, I felt a spark of rebellion. I suppose it would be interesting to experience it for myself. I decided I would just have to try my best to protect my eye. Driven by this new curiosity, I sneaked into the housekeeper's room and managed to steal the front door key. My heart was pounding as we approached the main hall leading to the door. Suddenly, we stopped. We saw a masked woman standing by a man who was holding a young girl in his arms. The girl was deep asleep. Nora gasped loudly. She stammered that the man was her dad. I was shocked and asked if he had come to pick her up. Nora frowned and pointed at them, whispering that they were all in the same boat and that the woman was the ringleader. I peered closer at them and spotted the masked woman's silver hair and luxurious dress. I realized with a start that it was my tester. She lives in the Grand Suite and visits me weekly to assess my learning and etiquette. We hid and listened. The man looked over at the woman and called her mom, asking how she was going to handle this case. The woman coldly replied that he should just leave the sleeping girl in the empty room at the end of the hallway. As for Nora, she thought she would settle in properly in a week or so, and then they could start her etiquette and culture lessons. The man seemed confused for a second about which Nora she meant, but then claimed to remember. The woman then scolded him, saying he should restrict himself. She listed us off for Rihanna, Nora, and now this child. She warned him not to let the list of his illegitimate children be as long as his arm. The man callously replied that she could just throw us away somewhere and asked why she bothered raising us. The woman replied that we were her grandchildren after all, and we couldn't end up like street rats because we might become useful. But she insisted this had to be the last one, because they couldn't risk Laura finding out about us. She said it would ruin the family's affluent name. The man assured her not to fear, as his wife was kind, foolish, and completely clueless about these matters, thanks to her smart move. I felt cold all over, so were we this heartless man's illegitimate children? And because of his deceit, he was forcing us to live in darkness? I felt a surge of anger I had never felt before. I didn't want to be locked up and lied to any longer. We needed to escape. From then on, Nora kept her act up and behaved like an angel, which eventually led to us being allowed to study together. And today was finally the day. We were sitting together reading a book. We looked at each other, signaling it was time. Suddenly, I threw myself into a convulsion. I had painted red rashes all over my body and face to look sick. Nora immediately started screaming that I was having a convulsion and that they must take me to the hospital as soon as possible. However, things didn't go as planned. The maids called the doctor to come round to the castle instead. The plan was to escape when we were taken taken outside. If the doctor came here, he'd discover that my rashes were painted on and our plan would be disclosed. We had to switch to plan B. I remained lying on the bed, committing to the role of a patient, while Nora locked the door of the room. She ran into the bathroom and started screaming for help, claiming there was a giant spider in there. As expected, the doctor rushed to check. The moment he stepped inside, Nora slammed the door and locked him in. We moved quickly. We pulled out a knotted string made of the fabrics from our embroidery class from under the bed and threw it out the window. I closed my eyes tight as I climbed down. I was terrified. As soon as my feet touched the ground, I buried my head in my hands. I didn't expect it to be so bright outside. I panicked, crying out to Nora that the light was burning my eye. Nora didn't have time for my fear. She yelled at me, asking what I was talking about. She told me there was no time for hysterics and that I would be done for if I stayed there. She demanded that I open my eyes and run. I cried back that I was scared, but I reluctantly lowered my hands and opened my eye. I blinked. Nothing happened. My eyes didn't burn. They seemed fine. I could see the grass, the trees, everything. It was all a lie, but there was no time to celebrate. I looked back and saw a couple of maids chasing after me. Nora pulled my hand and we ran towards the garden. Fortunately, we managed to get out of their sight for a moment. But then a huge hound appeared out of nowhere. It let out a deep, terrifying growl at us. I crouched down in a bush shaking, but Nora waved the dog closer and then patted him. It was like magic. The dog suddenly became unusually obedient and led us to a secret place, a small dog-sized passageway. I hesitated, looking at the small hole, but seeing the maids gaining on us, I reluctantly squeezed through it as fast as I could. I heard the sharp sound of fabric tearing as my dress ripped. But I made it through. Nora grabbed my hand again, and we ran fast down the hill to the main road. I couldn't believe I was putting my destiny in the hands of this reckless girl. She said we had to get to her grandmother's house right away for help. We finally made it down to the main road, breathless and disheveled. Nora didn't waste a second. She started impatiently waving her hand to signal. I stood behind her, terrified, flinching every time something zoomed past us. I stared at the road in total confusion. What were those things running back and forth on the road? And why were they making that loud, annoying noise? It was so overwhelming that I had to hold my head with both hands. I watched Nora and wondered why she was waving her arms about like that. Did she want them to stop? It was too bad that nobody did. I thought to myself that it was simply because she is not a princess, so naturally, no one felt the need to obey her commands. We kept wandering along the roadside until we saw something Nora called a truck parked on the side. She rushed over and helped me climb onto the back of it. To my delight, it was full of bananas. I was starving, so I immediately stuffed my mouth full of them to ward off my hunger, barely paying attention as the scenery began to change rapidly around us. After a while, the truck entered the center of a bustling area and came to a stop. We immediately jumped off before we could get caught. Nora still had to help me down because of my heavy dress. I held on to her tight, frightened by the sheer number of people surrounding us. They kept staring at me, and I couldn't understand why. Their style was so peculiar. They were all dressed in dull, plain clothes while I was wearing my beautiful gown. I concluded that maybe they were just commoners. Then we decided to use our power to demand that a man take us to Nora's grandma's house. Oh, the whole ordeal was simply exhausting for someone of my status. We sat in the back of the yellow car, which I later learned is called a taxi. I took a look outside the window and gasped. The outside world was actually beautiful. It was sparkling with countless lights, and there were glass exhibitions displaying everything in the world, such as food, toys, flowers, and even living creatures. Nora saw me staring and told me those adorable furry things are called pet. It seemed like they had absolutely everything on display. But the most important thing was that my eyes didn't get sore looking at those shiny things at all. I kept pointing at everything we passed, pestering Nora with questions about what this was and what that was. When we arrived in front of a gate, an old woman came out. The moment Nora saw her, she burst into tears and ran straight into the old woman's arms. Her grandma hugged her so tight, stroking her hair and whispering comforting words to calm her down. I just stood there silently watching them. I had never seen such a warm display of affection before. I found myself wondering if this is what family love is supposed to look like. After their emotional reunion, the old woman turned to me with a gentle smile and warmly welcomed me into her home. Her house was full of the strangest items I had ever seen. While Nora sat down to tell her grandma what had happened to us, I found myself completely bewitched by a talking black box hanging on the wall. Suddenly, Nora's grandma led us out to her small truck and drove us to a place she called the Cop. The people there all wore these same funny blue outfits. They bombarded us with dozens of confusing questions, asking about things I had never heard of. I remember feeling very puzzled when they asked for an ID card. I had no idea what that was. A few days later, there was news that the cops had caught my so-called dad, the evil grandmother, and the maids as well. Nora explained to me that he was a womanizer. When his lovers asked him to support his children, he was so afraid his wife would find out that he took the children and locked them away in the castle to hide his secret. They are currently awaiting something called a trial, which Nora says is a place where bad people finally get their comeuppance. Now I am trying to get used to this new reality. The outside world is so busy and loud. I didn't realize there would be so many unmasked faces everywhere. It's quite overwhelming. And that strange talking box on the wall, which turns out to be a TV, still startles me, especially when someone inside it is holding a weapon. Just the other day, I got so frightened that I threw a pot of flowers at it, because I genuinely thought those people on the screen were attacking. Nora says that when I've adjusted to my new life a little more, I'll start going to school with her. She even promised that one day I'll learn how to drive one of those smaller trucks myself. But firstly, she is teaching me how to dress like other people do, and she is showing me how to use this small brick to communicate with people. She calls it a mobile phone. This world is confusing and strange, but I'm sure with Nora's help, I'll soon adapt. I'm especially eager to learn how to respond to the handsome neighbor who lives next door. I used to spend my days watching the world through a window, terrified of the light, but now I'm finally standing in. No more masks and no more lies, my real life has only just begun.